this is your Zoom page. This you have to just drag over.
Oh.
Just drag it over.
Oh.
And then hit the maximize.
Right.
There you go. Now, go down here to more.
Oh, wait, I want to pause the recording. Okay. Okay, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Rabbi Bonnie Margulis. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. We are one of the organizing organizations behind the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. The Dane Sanctuary Coalition is a coalition of about 21 congregations and about 8 organizations across Dane County that have come together to fight for immigration rights and immigration justice, and potentially to provide physical sanctuary for somebody in our community who is at imminent risk for deportation. And we've been around since 2017, and we welcome you all to join us in this important work. Just a few housekeeping items. Our event tonight is co-sponsored by the Dane Sanctuary Coalition and Orchard Ridge United Church of Christ, which is one of our host sites. And we really appreciate the folks at Orchard Ridge who arranged this with us. We are recording this event, and it will be put up on YouTube. It will also be live on the Dane Sanctuary Coalition Facebook page, and we invite you, if you have not yet, to like that page. So you will see the news and announcements and events that are posted on that page. We will be hearing from our speaker. She will be sharing her screen with a PowerPoint presentation, after which we will open it up for Q&A. For those of you who are on Zoom, we'll ask you to write your questions into the chat. And for those who are on Facebook, we will ask that you put your comments or your questions in the comment section on Facebook. So we are thrilled to welcome Aissa Olivarez. She has been an amazing partner in the Dane Sanctuary Coalition, an amazing resource for us, and has been just an invaluable asset to our community. Aissa is the managing attorney at the Community Immigration Law Center, or SILC, which is housed at Christ Presbyterian Church here in Madison. And Aissa joined SILC in 2017. Prior to that, she was the staff attorney at the Pro Bono ASYLUM Representation Children's Project, where she represented unaccompanied minor children who were placed in removal proceedings by the Department of Homeland Security in Harlingen, Texas. Aissa earned her BA in government from the University of Texas in Austin, and earned her law degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School in May of 2016. So I'm going to, without further ado, turn it over to Aissa. I know she has a lot of important information to share with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And thank you to the Dane Sanctuary Coalition and to Orchard Ridge United Church of Christ for sponsoring this event. Again, my name is Aissa Olivarez, and I work at the Community Immigration Law Center, currently housed here in Madison. I'll talk a lot about our work at the end, about what we do, but I want to talk briefly about how I got into this work. I was born on the border in McAllen, Texas, and we would often visit the other side of the border, just 10 minutes south of where my home was. And quickly I was able to see the inequity, how different life was just 10 minutes south of me because of a border, right? Because of a line in the ground that separated these two countries. And so I was very intrigued at a young age around social justice issues, around civil rights issues. and around these issues of poverty that we see on the border. And then I became a first grade teacher. I come from a family of educators, and quickly I started to be asked for assistance from the parents of the students that I taught. And I was unable to advocate for them as strongly as I would have liked to as a teacher. And so I decided that I would pursue immigration law and go to law school so that I could be a better advocate for those families. So that's how I got into the work. Now, this work is very difficult. You'll see that my PowerPoint and my chat today are not very uplifting. We're in a very difficult time, and we have been in a very difficult time around immigration law, immigration reform. And so the things that keep me going are definitely my clients, those small victories, even though sometimes they're few and far between. Coalitions like the Dane Sanctuary Coalition, like the Dane County Collaborative that we have here. We are very unique in Dane County to have such amazing support from faith-based organizations, from legal service providers, from social workers and mental health providers. It's such an amazing, overwhelming support that I am able to keep doing what I'm doing because so many people are engaged and interested in helping. We have so many helpers, and it's important in this really depressing time in immigration to remember who the helpers are and that they're out there. And so thank you to the helpers. I'm sure you're also in the audience. You are what keep me going in difficult times like this. So I'm going to share my screen, and please let me know if it does. Let's see. Does that look okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Let me go back to my first one. So I'll be discussing new developments in immigration law and immigration policy. It seems like in this administration that things are definitely changing by the day. We get alerts I get alerts from colleagues, alerts from the American Immigration Lawyers Association, alerts from other nonprofits across the country about what is going on, whether that be litigation or a change in policy. And literally me and my colleagues that practice here in Madison, we put together a spreadsheet of the ongoing changes just because there are so many to keep up with, and keeping track of each one and its changes and each step in litigation just became really difficult. So we have a spreadsheet with ongoing changes, and if you look at that spreadsheet daily, there is something brand new. And so it's been a very dynamic area of practice, definitely over the last 10 years. And so I will discuss, if I discussed every change in immigration policy, even the newer ones, we would be here for several hours. So I'm going to discuss the most recent ones, the ones that I think are impacting our Dane County population the most, or will impact them. And I'll also go through what issues we're seeing at the southern border right now, our border with Mexico, and what detention looks like nationally and in Wisconsin. And I'll hopefully end on a high note by talking more about the work and what our work looked like at the Community Immigration Law Center this year through our Universal Representation Program, and how successful we've been in getting people released from detention. So our latest changes in immigration policy. I want to first let you all know that all of the information that I'm getting from these last few slides, I think I cited at the end, but it's from ILRC, and I'll send you the link in the chat toward the end. But basically, ILRC is an organization that does a lot of advocacy, and they outline the 100+ policy changes that have happened during, and I think, can you see it now? That have the website. So this is ilrc.org/immigration-attacks. This is 100+ policy changes that have devastated immigrants and asylum seekers. And we could go on that list, for hours. And I encourage you to go down and to read it. I picked out a few to highlight today, but ILRC is definitely doing really great work in putting all of this wonderful information together. So I'm going to start with preventing entry, right? One of the ways that we are seeing this administration dismantle the immigration system is by preventing entry of individuals to the United States. One example of that is the Remain in Mexico policy, or what we call MPP, the Migration Protection Protocols. Basically, it's a policy that that was enacted to force people to stay in Mexico while they wait for their asylum hearings in the United States. And so essentially there are tent cities along the border of people waiting, of people hoping to be able to see a judge on their case very soon. It just so happened that a very difficult, very big storm hit. And I believe it was a tropical storm hit the Gulf of Mexico, and a lot of people in those tent cities were flooded out, had to find a different place to live, but were so passionate and so intent on making it back to the US for their future hearing that they made it work. And they've really been suffering in these tent cities. And it's been particularly difficult right now during COVID-19 for people who are in MPP because their hearings have been canceled, right? They have not been allowed into the United States to attend these hearings. They've been waiting months now. Some people are hearing that they won't be able to go back into court until January, February, or March of next year. And that means that they wait longer on the border. So one way that this administration has, dismantled the immigration system is by preventing entry of people, right? The lawful right to seek asylum in the United States. Another way that they are doing this is by denying status. And there's many ways that they've been doing this, but one way that I thought you all would most relate to is limiting work authorization. Usually individuals who are asylum seekers come to the United States and they're eligible for a work permit after they file their asylum application. What this administration has done is they've changed the eligibility criteria that's needed to gain access to that work permit. And that work permit is like gold. It gives you access to a social security number. It allows you to begin to support your family so that you can get established here while you fight your case. It takes resources to fight a case. You have to find a lawyer. Sometimes you have to find an expert. You have to drive to court, in this case, to Chicago. So it takes resources to have to fight an asylum case here in the United States, and having that work permit allows people to be able to do that. Unfortunately, these rule changes are going to change the process dramatically, and many people who used to even be eligible for these work permits no longer will be. So this administration also has participated in taking away status from people. And one biggest example is the termination of DACA. So we know now that DACA was rescinded and it went straight into litigation, and the Trump administration lost at the Supreme Court level, but it was on an issue of basically saying you didn't end it correctly. You didn't end DACA the right way. And DACA gives young men and women who came to the United States as children a deferred action status. Basically, it's a promise from the Department of Homeland Security that for the time being, we will not deport you. You are protected from deportation right now, as long as you have this deferred action status. You get a work permit, you get a social security card. It's all very temporary, right? It's not an official immigration status. But it is a deferred action, right? It is something that gives you access to the system to be able to work. It means that DHS knows where you are, and it protects you from deportation. And that currently was rescinded. It's no longer an option for people to apply for DACA. And so what we're seeing now is just people renewing their DACA status and hoping that if there is a change in policy in the future, it is a more permanent change so that people can actually come away from this with an actual status. Another way that we know that this administration has dismantled the immigration system is through destroying due process, right? Everybody has the right to a full and fair hearing. People have the right to be heard and for the proceedings to happen fairly. And we're seeing right now a rise in state courthouse arrests, including here in Dane County. So what we're seeing now is people basically no longer going or being too afraid to go to their court hearings in Dane County or other county courts because they're afraid of going through enforcement or being arrested as under an enforcement action by ICE. And so this has a chilling effect on our local communities. There are many people who can't get justice because, you know, not all litigants are in the courtroom or they don't show up, or somebody is taken from the courthouse before they can even face their case and they're quickly deported. So this rise in courthouse arrests has definitely been something that there's been an outcry against because of the way it impacts due process. Unfortunately, we have seen it slow. Not unfortunately, fortunately, we have seen it slow down during COVID-19 because so much of the hearings that are happening via Zoom. But we do anticipate that once everything goes back in person, we will see the same type of enforcement happening in our courthouses. And the last two ways that this administration has dismantled the immigration system include detaining, deporting, and terrorizing the immigrant community. And one of the main ways is through abolition of enforcement priorities. The Obama administration deported many people, more than the Trump administration has at this point. But the Obama administration implemented something called secure communities, which was incredibly controversial, you know, in our immigration, between immigration advocates. It created a priority system for people who were basically considered to be dangerous to the community, dangerous to national security. And so it created basically priorities for people. And once the Trump administration came into power, all of those priorities were gone. Anyone who was undocumented, anyone who had a pending charge, not somebody who was found guilty, anyone with a pending charge or arrest, currently those are people who are enforcement priorities. So everyone is an enforcement priority. We no longer have targets. We're going after anybody who has had any kind of interaction with the system. So we've seen definitely because of that an uptick in arrests here in the last 3 years, the last 4 years almost, because of the fact that everyone who is undocumented is a target for the Trump administration. And lastly, retaliation. So we've seen this administration retaliate against individuals who are providing humanitarian aid at the border. We've seen people be prosecuted for filling water jugs in the desert, right? So this retaliation definitely has been a theme by this administration to deter this type of work, this type of humanitarian aid. And it's definitely something that's incredibly disheartening. We have so many very passionate people doing work on the border. Luckily, they've kept on doing it, right? They're not afraid. But this retaliation definitely seeks to quiet so many of those passionate voices. And it's really, really very concerning. I'm going to highlight two things that I think would go along in the slides that I just spoke about, but I think definitely apply more to the work that we're doing here in Dane County and things that we might see in the coming weeks or months before, before the election and after the election even. So we have seen an increased threat of enforcement on sanctuary cities, right? So 2 weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security announced that they would target cities with sanctuary policies for increased enforcement. And this is problematic. We know that Madison technically, right, does not consider itself a sanctuary city, but we definitely have sanctuary policies in place. We have a sheriff in Dane County who does not honor ICE holds, although there are other ways that there's arrests that still happen at the Dane County Jail, but they do not officially honor ICE holds, and that's a sanctuary type policy. And so it's, we haven't seen an uptick in enforcement or any kind of raid here in Madison or Dane County. So I want to be clear about that. We haven't seen that since September of 2018 when ICE did come into our community and arrest 20 people here in Dane County. But the threat of this is clear. The threat of this is real. And we know that this is a very strong possibility that this threat of enforcement is actually carried out. So it's something that I wanted to bring everybody's attention to, everyone's attention, because this is a reality, and it's something that you might see more in the media and something you might hear about from us. Definitely, once we're notified of raids, we will start letting know our partners, the Sanctuary Coalition, about the happenings so that we can get the support we need during that time. Another thing that is extremely problematic in the work that we do, and something that's been announced, is the expansion of expedited removal. And what that is basically what it says. It's a removal that happens in a very quick way. You have no right to counsel, no right to a hearing, and no right to appeal. This is not something, again, that is happening right now in our community. This is something that was announced by the Trump administration in January 2017, and finally it's made its way through litigation. And what we're hearing is that ICE and ICE officers are being trained this week on how to execute expedited removal in the United States. We are hearing that there will be exceptions. So people who are already at risk of deportation, or who are already in deportation proceedings and are at risk of deportation because they're in an actual removal proceeding, the word is that those people will not be subject to expedited removal. Also, if you can prove that you've been in the United States before July 23rd of 2019, it's likely you'll be an exception. They are going to focus on people who cannot prove that they've been in the United States for 2 years. So all of this, again, has been an announcement. There hasn't been an official announcement by the Trump administration. ICE has not begun to implement this locally or anywhere in the nation yet. And we're currently waiting to hear what information is being shared with ICE about how they are going to execute this, if they are at all. And so our attorneys are in communication with ICE in Milwaukee and with ICE officers that we work with here in Madison to see what this looks like. Are they willing to share information with us about how they've been trained, about what the exceptions will be, and about whether or not this is going to be something that happens here in Wisconsin? So again, both the increased threat of enforcement on sanctuary cities and expedited removal are something that are not happening right now. These are both just threats of what could happen pre-election and post-election here in Wisconsin. So I'm going to move on to issues at our southern border. I talked about MPP at the beginning of my slides as a way, right, to keep people outside of the United States and a way to deter asylum seekers from their legal right to seek asylum because of having to stay in Mexico with no place to live and no place to go. And essentially the border in Mexico is not the safest place for somebody to wait and to live with their families. And a lot of these people seeking asylum through MPP are families with young children. So it forces people to seek protection from the US while waiting, right, in Mexico. And all of these court hearings, like I said earlier, have been canceled since March. So people remain in these tent cities waiting for a chance to be heard at their hearing. As far as we know, all the people who have applied for asylum under MPP will continue to be able to eventually come into the US and fight their case. Unfortunately, that's not the case for people who are coming to the United States right now to seek asylum. Currently, since March 20th of 2020, the CDC and the Department of Homeland Security have promulgated regulations barring the entry or processing of asylum seekers. So they've enacted Title 42 of the US Code, basically saying nobody can come in, we are in a health crisis, we're going to turn you back either to Mexico or to your home country. And this is especially problematic because this includes unaccompanied minors. So children who come to the United States to seek asylum by themselves without adult supervision. We have something called the Flores settlement, and that settlement basically says that there are ways that we should be treating our unaccompanied minors at the border in regards to when we decide to detain them, how long they can be detained, and what should happen with them, and how the treatment that they should receive from our government when they avail themselves to our government. And we have seen that minors have been included in Title 42. And so when we hear about the hotels that children are being held in, they're being held in there temporarily until they can be sent back to their home country, because they're not going to be allowed into the United States to seek asylum. And they won't be processed like a normal unaccompanied minor who would usually be sent to Customs and Border Protection, fingerprinted, and sent to a children's shelter on the border. That's not happening right now. One of the most heartbreaking stories on this, I put the article here in the PowerPoint, and I'll make sure to also put it in the chat. A young boy, with a young 12-year-old with special needs, was part of the MPP program with his mother. They were waiting in Mexico for their hearing, but their hearing kept getting postponed, canceled, because of this COVID-19 crisis. This poor mother didn't see an end in sight. And she decided to have her 12-year-old cross the border by himself because he had an uncle that he could live with in California. He was apprehended, and the uncle, was calling the mom, and they said, where is he? Did you ever receive him? We got a phone call from Customs and Border Patrol that he was there and that he was going to be released to me. And before the mother knew it, he was missing for days. They didn't know where he was, and eventually found out that he had been deported back to Guatemala, and all by himself, and reunified with his father. And so this totally goes up against, the TVPRA and the Flores settlement, which are both things that are used, regulations that are used to protect unaccompanied minors. And so I left the article here. It's a rather long article, very detailed, very well written. And it's just a heartbreaking story of what is happening on our border right now, and the atrocities that asylum seekers are facing right now at our southern border with Mexico. So my last piece is to go through immigration detention and COVID-19. And I will take questions at the end. I just want to make sure to leave plenty of time for those. So I want to give some context first when I talk about immigration detention. How many people are in immigration detention? We can see that in 1994, we had about 7,000 people in detention. Currently, our daily average of people in detention in 2019 is over 45,000 people, a daily average of over 45,000 people. It's definitely an industry. We know that people are housed both in county facilities and in private facilities. And ICE, it's very expensive to house people in these detention centers, yet we're seeing our numbers go up, further up every year. When we're seeing who is detained, right? Who is detained in these facilities? We're seeing mostly people from Mexico, from Central America, and then we're seeing people from Nigeria, from Dominican Republic, from Ghana, from Haiti, right? And so this goes back to our social justice issues and mass incarceration. When we think about who's being arrested by police, it's our Black and brown men. And when we think about who's being arrested by ICE, it's our Black and brown men. It's exactly, it's reflected in the numbers. And mass incarceration continues past and out of the criminal justice system and into what we call the immigration detention system. Here are the ICE detention locations. So you can see it's sorted between county facility and privately owned facilities. County facilities are usually smaller and have less beds. So you see a lot of them, but they're usually smaller contracts. They're not using the entire facility for ICE beds. And the privately operated facilities are ICE owned and are rather large facilities. We're seeing there hundreds of beds that are available for ICE to use and to fill. In Wisconsin, we have two facilities, two ICE detention locations, the Dodge County Jail in Juneau, Wisconsin, and the Kenosha County Jail in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the threat to people's lives that happened at the beginning of the pandemic, but currently I want to be very transparent. The Kenosha facility actually, to my knowledge right now, is not housing anyone for ICE. Basically what happened is individuals with ICE were wanting to bring in more people, continue enforcement, continue to admit people to the county jail. And the sheriff said, you know what, this is a pandemic. I'm not going to take any more ICE people arrested by ICE. I'm no longer going to have them in my facility. You can no longer come in and out of here during this pandemic. And ICE was not happy. They pulled everybody out of that facility that was detained there, shuffled them between the Dodge County Jail in Juneau and several facilities in Illinois. And so at the very beginning of the pandemic, we started to see our clients essentially disappear from the Dodge County facility. We didn't know where they were. They, were not in communication for about 24 hours. We finally learned that they were transferred to a Pulaski facility, which is over 8 hours away from Madison. And we were trying to get them out on bond. Their families, were able to see them at the Dodge facility. They're no longer able to see them at the Pulaski facility. So it was a really a time where we were very scared for our clients. We knew also that them being transferred out of Dodge meant that they would be at a higher likelihood of being exposed to COVID-19. So the pandemic response by ICE has been a lot like this administration's response to the pandemic. It's been very haphazard and very scary for our clients. People who are in detention are afraid not only of being deported, but are afraid for their lives inside of the detention facility. You cannot socially distance inside of a detention facility. These are shared, quarters, shared areas everywhere. So It's very difficult. We have some very terrified clients, and their families are also very terrified for them. I talked about the transfers of individuals from Wisconsin. Our clients were taken to Illinois, but there were some people there that were taken as far away as Texas. And something that you should know about ICE is when we argue that our clients should stay as close as possible to us here at the Dodge facility, you know, they argue with us, we can take them anywhere within the United States, right? And so when somebody is taken that far away, it's very difficult to continue representing them when you can no longer have the same communication, the same resources for them that are close by. The other thing that happened is that there was the closure of 2 places where families could post bond. Milwaukee is the closest place where families can go post bond for their loved one to be released. Chicago is the next closest. Both of those locations were closed in March, and families had to go all the way to Indianapolis to post bond. So we know that the families that we serve through the Community Immigration Law Center are low-income clients. That is the reason that we have been established, so that we can make sure everyone has an attorney regardless of whether they're able to afford it. And so the fact that we had these families who are already facing their family member being moved, and they're facing also this pandemic, loss of jobs, and you know, teaching kids remotely, suddenly have to figure out how to get, you know, a $10,000 money order to Indianapolis to be able to get their family member out as soon as possible, because every day that they are in there is another day that they could be exposed to COVID-19. So luckily now the Chicago facility is reopened. It's still really very hard for us to get our clients to Chicago. But luckily the Chicago office is open. I have been calling the Milwaukee office, hoping that they will reopen. I hope that they will reopen soon. Again, it's the closest place that people can post a bond for a loved one, but currently that office is still closed for bond payments. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were also told as attorneys that we would be required to wear PPE to go into the facility to visit our clients. And that was, you know, scary for us. We realized at that point that there was already a scarcity of PPE for our medical workers, for our essential workers. And now, you know, we were going to take some of that away from them to be able to go see our clients. Luckily, the Dodge facility has been very accommodating and being able to allow us to visit with our clients remotely and over the phone. So it hasn't been the issue of us having to get PPE to go into the facility. And actually DHS quickly took that back a couple weeks later and said, never mind, you don't have to wear PPE. We do have our rock star attorney, Vanessa Avila, who has gone into the facility since the pandemic started. And she does wear her N95 mask and she wears gloves. And they are also no contact visits. So there is a large glass between her and the client. So it is as safe as possible. But she does put herself at risk to be able to make sure that we're representing our clients the best and most efficient way possible. Another really difficult thing for our clients was that their loved ones were now no longer being transported to where they were posting bond. So usually if you post bond in Milwaukee, they take your loved one to Milwaukee and you get to take them home with you that day. Same thing in Chicago. Now, because of the threat of COVID-19, they're letting people go directly away from the detention facility. So if a family member is in Chicago paying bond, they then have to make the trek up from Chicago all the way to Juneau, Wisconsin to pick up their loved one from the facility. And so it's been really difficult. Luckily, families have been able to arrange either a cab or another loved one to make those car rides a success and picking up their loved ones, but it's definitely been a hurdle to being able to reunite families. And I think the most difficult and sad thing about this pandemic has been the loss of life in ICE custody. We've had 8 people die in ICE custody due to COVID-19, and thousands more have been infected with the virus. I did include a link at the bottom for ICE and the coronavirus page, which shows which facilities have been impacted by the deaths, by those that have been diagnosed or tested positive, and also the number of people that they've tested in their facilities. Luckily, the Dodge County facility has not had any positive tests. It's a fairly small facility. We only have about 200 beds, but our clients report feeling, afraid, but they also feel like they might be in a more safe situation than they've heard of other people in other facilities. So please keep those families of the 8 people who have passed in your prayers, those who are suffering through coronavirus right now, and those individuals who suffer through detention. So I talked about our community and the way that it's been impacted by arrests. We've seen an increase in our courthouses, an increase in investing people with alcohol-related and domestic violence-related pending charges, right? So all of these are pending criminal charges. We're not seeing convictions, people with convictions come into the facility necessarily, which makes it very difficult for us to represent people because they have ongoing issues in the Dane County jurisdiction. And so they're coming back and forth. And we do know that the Dane County Jail hasn't been immune to COVID-19. There's been some very high numbers reported in the Dane County Jail. And so the fact that people are taken back and forth is especially problematic and scary for clients. As I begin to wrap up, I wanted to talk about how immigration court has been used as a tool for enforcement by the Department of Homeland Security and the Trump administration. So they've shifted away from prosecutorial discretion. So they've shifted away from basically saying, we're not going to pursue this person from deportation anymore. It's no longer, an option. We're going to close that down. We can no longer speak to prosecutors about this possibility. So prosecutorial discretion is out the door. We know that immigration judges don't have the power to be as neutral arbiters as we'd like them to be. There's case quotas have been imposed on immigration judges and very strict case timelines. So they're trying to rush toward a final hearing as fast as possible. They want people out of the facilities, out of the United States, and they are pressuring the immigration judges to move through proceedings very quickly. We also know that a large number of the immigration judges who have been hired in the last 6 months have mostly been former ICE attorneys, so prosecutors, people who have been trained to go into these proceedings defending the Department of Homeland Security are the ones who are being appointed as immigration judges. And we also know that the Executive Office for Immigration Review, or EOIR, has prematurely reopened courts and moved forward with hearings in spite of the pandemic so that they can get as many people, again, out of the system as possible. A little bit of a highlight before I take questions. So an Eye Toward Reform, we have what's called a universal representation program here in Dane County. So I hope to end this, like I said, on a high note. People who are detained by the Department of Homeland Security and are at risk deportation have the right to an attorney, but not the right to a government-funded attorney like you do in criminal proceedings. And so that means we have people who go before an immigration judge and against an ICE attorney all by themselves, fighting for their lives, fighting against deportation. This universal representation program is the notion that every individual at risk of deportation should have access to an immigration attorney, regardless of whether or not they can afford it. And so our universal representation program allows us to extend representation to any Dane County resident who falls within our financial guidelines, regardless of any other factor, to make sure that they are represented and receive a zealous advocate by their side when they are fighting deportation. So far, we've represented 96 clients, and of these 96 clients, 91 children with a parent have been represented. 78% of people who are eligible for bond have received either a lower bond or a bond had been set for this individual. At this point, we have 39% of our completed cases have achieved a successful outcome. That might seem low. We also have cases that complete very slowly. There's such a large backlog in immigration court that we have clients waiting 1, 2, 3 years to have their case completed. And so currently we're at 39%, and that's compared with a 3% national success rate for people who represent themselves. So we think we're making a pretty good big difference. And our partners at the Immigrant Justice Clinic have served over 700 people at the Dodge facility with Know Your Rights presentations in the year of 2019. So with that, I know I ran a little over time. I talked a whole lot, but I hope you have some really good questions. I'll leave my contact information up. And I do just want to end on, if you're thinking about any of your year-end giving, please consider the Dane County Collaborative. It's a group of legal service providers that serve our local immigrant community. Rabbi Bonnie, I will toss it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Aissa. This has been amazing, thorough, and eye-opening and disturbing, which is kind of what you intended, I'm sure. But the work of Silk is very impressive and does help us to end on a hopeful note. The work that you all do is life-saving, and we thank you all so much for what you are doing. I want to anticipate a question that people are going to ask. Will we be able to share your PowerPoint?
Yes, and I should say, since this is recorded, but just as a disclaimer, you know, please don't take this as legal advice. If you have a legal advisor, please talk to your legal advisor about your unique situation. But yes, please feel free to share my PowerPoint. I hope that because of all the changes, it won't quickly become outdated, but that might be the case.
Yes, thank you. So I will share out the PowerPoint with everybody who has registered tonight. So we already have a question. And before I read this question, I just want to also have a little disclaimer. We are a 501c3 organization. We're happy to talk about possible scenarios depending on different election outcomes, but please do not take this as directing you to vote for or against any particular candidate. It's simply informational. So our question is, if Joe Biden is elected as president, what changes in immigration policy do you anticipate likely will occur, and how soon after the inauguration will the changes be evident?
Well, that's a great question. We know that the Biden campaign has promised to fix the DACA situation on the first day in office. So that is significant. We know that DACA is not a possibility for individuals right now who came as children and are currently undocumented. So that's huge, and we hope that it includes a path to citizenship, a path to have a true status here in the United States. Another thing that actually the Biden campaign has talked about as well is universal representation. So a program like we have here in Dane County, going basically across the nation to make sure that people, pro se respondents, are represented by an immigration lawyer in court. And so that's something that I was very excited to see. And there are also things like we saw, right, the 100+ policy changes, right, by this administration. There's a lot of things that are not going to be undone quickly. Some of them are going to take time, and they might not ever get to the place where they're able to undo all of the damage. Much damage has been done by this administration on the immigrant community. And it's going to, only time will tell what will happen, but I don't think we're going to see everything be undone, but I will remain hopeful.
Thank you. How are you recommending that undocumented families prepare for the potential of enforcement actions you mentioned coming before and just after the election?
Sure. So, like I said, these are all just threats by the administration. We've seen these happen before without follow through. We are planning as a Dane County, the emergency response team here in Dane County and the Immigration Affairs Office of Dane County, along with the Immigrant Justice Clinic, will have a brief Facebook Live Know Your Rights next week. We will announce that on our Community Immigration Law Center Facebook page, and I'll make sure to share it with Rabbi Bonnie and the Dane County Sanctuary Coalition that will speak about how families can prepare for these, the possibility and the threat of these enforcement actions so that everybody is ready.
Thank you. What caused the bond locations in Milwaukee and Chicago to be closed?
Oh, that's a good question. I am not sure. I think the fact that Milwaukee is such a small office, they decided to kind of pawn it off to Chicago and Indianapolis. And then when Chicago became really the epicenter of the pandemic at some point, they decided to also close. And so I think it just had to do with how many cases were being seen in those jurisdictions.
Right. Will the Know Your Rights presentation be in Spanish?
Yes, it will be in Spanish. We will have it in Spanish and in English, and we're hoping to communicate with families, remind them of what their rights are. If ICE comes to the door, do not open the door. Ask for a warrant that is signed by a judge. Please, ask for a lawyer and do not say a word to these officials if they do end up arresting you. And we also will ask and suggest that they carry around certain documentation with them. Again, that's to be announced. We're waiting to see what ultimately or how ICE has been trained on executing this new expedited removal that they're threatening. But we hope to have all of those details by next week, and I'll make sure to share that information widely, and we'll make sure it's also bilingual. And we're hoping that we're able to get it translated for our Hmong community as well.
Great, thank you. So I have a couple of questions, and we'll see if anybody else puts anything in the chat. And also, if you're watching on Facebook, feel free to put a question in the comment section. So from the perspective of the Dane Sanctuary Coalition, we've been, looking at the situation and seeing what's happening, and that a lot of things have kind of been put on hold because of COVID. And prior to the pandemic, all the immigration attorneys that we work with have always said to us it's a question of when, not if, we're going to have somebody who is in need of sanctuary. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I was wondering if you had thoughts about that.
Sure. I mean, I think when we see that cities with sanctuary policies, have the potential to be targeted, when we see the fact that expedited removal might be expanded to the interior of the United States, those are all things enforcement related that make it a high likelihood that somebody might need to seek sanctuary. And we are seeing also, an increase in arrests of people who have prior removal orders, right? People who have been deported before, but who have been allowed to continue to live their lives here, maybe because their country has not yet given them the proper documents to travel back home. But I think that the way things are going and the trajectory they're going in, I think that definitely it is, not if, but when. I think that continues to be a very high likelihood. And again, like we talked about with the Biden administration, we, despite party lines, we've criminalized immigrants on both sides. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that enforcement actions and I don't think the Biden administration is intent, maybe they are, I could be corrected, on ending the detention system. Mm-hmm. And ending deportation. So yes, definitely the need for sanctuary is a very high possibility. And I think the fact that we're prepared as a community, is very important and speaks volumes about the support that people can find here.
Thank you. On Facebook, Leslie Ann Vasquez says, Aissa, can you make sure I get the information on next week's session so I can put it on the Familias page?
Yes, definitely. I'll write that down.
Great. So looking post-election, regardless of the outcome, both on the state level and on the federal level, do you have thoughts about, in terms of our advocacy work, what are the maybe like the top 3 things that you would want us to focus on in terms of policy that we want to be advocating for or against?
Sure. I feel like I have a long list, but I think definitely one of the things that was brought up yesterday on a panel that I was on, and that I think that we tend to put kind of in the back of our mind sometimes, because we are in a pandemic, is that we still don't have in-state tuition for individuals who are undocumented in Wisconsin. People are paying rates to that of someone who's coming from out of country to study here. And it's definitely a hurdle for those individuals who are undocumented and want to seek a higher education to be able to seek it, because it's just that much more expensive, and they do not have the same federal aid available to them. So I think in-state tuition, I think driver's license for all, right? That is huge. A driver's license is gold. Any of my clients will tell you that. It allows you to be able to travel safely from work, from home, to be able to drop off your kids, and without that fear of being pulled over, of being asked about your status. And so driver's license is huge. I know that the Evers administration was, considering it at some point. I think it was written into the budget and then it was taken out. But definitely as far as advocacy, that is really, really big. And of course, I'm really biased, but I've been in talks with the lieutenant governor and some really great policy organizations, and I would love to see universal representation go to the state level. We have it here in Dane County. Our Dane County residents are protected. If they cannot afford an immigration attorney and they are at risk of deportation and they are detained, we will be there to step in within our capacity. That's not the same for people in Sauk County. That's not the same for people in Milwaukee County. We would love it to be, and we would love to have that possibility. And so we're hoping that if it's not, local jurisdictions, decide to start taking this up just like Dane County did, or if our state decides that this is something that they want to make a priority, they want to make sure to keep families safe, families together here in Wisconsin by providing that type of funding for legal service providers.
Thank you. So I don't see any more questions at the moment, so I'm going to take this minute for a commercial interruption. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing presentation. We knew when Orchard Ridge first brought up the idea, I was like, oh yeah, great idea. And so I'm so glad that this has come to fruition. But I just want to give a commercial announcement to everybody that we have another event coming up next week, October 21st at 7 o'clock. We are going to be getting to know some of our immigration partners. And so in addition to hearing from Aissa talking more specifically about Silk and the work that they do, we're also going to hear from Fabiola Hamden, who is Dane County's immigration outreach specialist, from Janice Beers, who's an immigration attorney at the Catholic Multicultural Center, Karen Menendez-Kohler, who's the executive director of Centro Hispano, and a couple of the people from the Dane Sanctuary Coalition itself. We're going to talk about some of the opportunities to volunteer and some of the work that the Dane Sanctuary Coalition does and ways people can get involved. It is continuing to grow the list of people who are going to be coming to talk about the work that they do. So we really wanted to have an opportunity to, first of all, share with everybody the amazing work and the amazing people like Aissa who are leading these organizations, and to let you all, give you all some information and resources about what's out there in Dane County to help our immigrant neighbors and friends. So Aissa is putting some links into the chat. If you don't have a chance to grab them right now, we will be saving the chat. So we'll be, anything that you all didn't get to capture, we will capture for you, and you can let us know if you missed something, we can send it out to you all. So you're getting many thanks from many people on Facebook and here in the chat. And I just want to echo those thanks to you, not just for tonight, but for all the work that you do and all the ways that you help to make Madison a better place. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for being such a wonderful leader and lifting us up over at Silk when we need it, and making sure that our community has access to some very amazing resources.
Thank you. Thank you all. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy. And if you haven't voted yet, go vote. And when you go vote, bring 3 more people with you to go vote. Thank you all. Aissa, feel better. And everybody stay well and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Good night.